get it right. I want to welcome everybody to the National Sprint Car Hall of Fame and Museum, and I'm here with the Executive Director, Bob Baker. Bob, it's just a pleasure to be here today, and appreciate you taking some time from your busy schedule. Like you say, this is your busiest time of the year with the Nationals coming up, and have the opportunity to talk with us for just a little bit. And of course, what a collection of memorabilia and stuff of sprint car racing that you guys have here from just the very beginning up until right now. And of course, we were talking earlier about this car that's sitting here, since both of us were from around the Kansas City, central Missouri area. Tell us just a little bit about this car that's sitting here.
The car right behind us was raced by Roy Hibbard and also by Tom Corbin in the Midwest area, primarily around the Kansas City area, also Jefferson City, Sedalia, Moberly. As youngsters, we both watched the car race at Olympic Stadium, the old Lakeside Stadium on Old Lakeside Speedway on Leavenworth Road, and also Riverside Stadium. But Chuck Hines did a wonderful restoration on the car and has loaned the car to us. We have it in our front window during the Knoxville Nationals this week, so we're very proud to have the car with us. Tom Corbin was the first driver of the car and won 7 races in a row in this car, and then the car was driven by Roy Hibbard for years and years. Car also raced at the Saline County Speedway in Marshall, Missouri, which was a very popular place for super modified racing in the Midwest back in the 70s.
Like you said, this is kind of what I grew up on in racing, I guess, when I first started going, because back in late 50s, early 60s, it was sprint cars and late models, and basically that's all there was. So these were the kind of cars that we used to see run back then, and of course it's evolved from this into what we see out there today. And I was talking to somebody earlier this morning over at Mr. C's, and he says, well, the sprint cars haven't really changed that much, but they sure do go a lot faster.
Yeah, the super modifieds were cars without wings originally, basically the same wheelbase with V8 engines. They were very popular, had very large car counts at all the tracks in the Midwest when they raced, and they were a lot of fun to watch, and the drivers were just very entertaining and great to be around both during the races and after the races.
Yeah. Colorful group, like you say, a lot of fun, a lot of stuff going on after the races, as I recall, too. But I think we're going to kind of close this up here and maybe move over to another display. But anybody that's going to be up here for the Nationals, well, I got the opportunity to come here, and it's such a small admission price. $4 is so cheap to be able to come in here and see some of this stuff, and just about every one of them, I call them a piece of art, because they are just beautiful cars.
Yes, and again, we would like to thank Chuck Hines for loaning us the car. What a lot of people don't realize is that the cars in our museum mainly are loaned to us for a small amount of time, so that the cars and the exhibits change fairly regularly. There's only about 6 cars that the National Sprint Car Hall of Fame and Museum owns, so we're very happy that Chuck was able to loan us this recreation, this car of his. It's actually the real car. It's not a recreation. It's just completely restored, and it's just beautiful. It's in our front window during the Knoxville Nationals this year.
One other thing I might cover that I was thinking about on the way up here, I can remember back in the days before the Hall of Fame and Museum existed, was I don't know how many Nationals I came to, but they would take up collections and donations, and it's so nice to see the end result of that in the building and stuff that you do have there. And like I say, the collection is just fabulous.
We're very fortunate. Our building that we have here is all paid for. It's 36,000 square feet, and the memorabilia, the race cars, the museum, the movie theater on the second floor, and of course our Hall of Fame up on the second floor. We're very proud of. All of our inductees have their pictures overlooking Knoxville Raceway. It's just a really nice place to visit. You could spend a half a day in here easily.
Yeah. Let's move on, Bob. Let's go see and look at something else. I know there's a lot of good stuff waiting on us.
Sounds good.
Well, Bob, we have got one of the early sprint cars here. I think when you look at one of these and then some of the others that we've looked at in the museum, you kind of scratch your head a little bit and say, well, I guess they're the same thing, just a different generation.
Well, this is a 1923 Frontenac car. As you can see, the car had no numbers on the side of the car, but they used to spray paint the number of the car on the front radiator. It was termed a big car back when they raced it. They didn't have the term sprint car racing. They called the cars big cars because, as you can see, the cars were really big. Yeah. but this car has a crank on the front to turn the engine over, so there's no pushing involved like with modern day sprint cars. Also, there is no safety equipment on this car, unfortunately. There's no roll cage, no roll bar, no seat belts, and still has the handbrake on the left side here, as you can see. And the brake only slowed down the left rear tire and wheel. It did not slow the right rear down, so it was a very different type of racing back in the 20s and 30s.
I even see over on the exhaust pipe over there, they've got a piece of, I presume, asbestos maybe wrapped around that.
I think it's just a towel that maybe was treated back in the day. I don't know if they had asbestos back in the 1920s, but it's a car that's very historic. We're very fortunate to have it on loan to us. The car raced both board tracks, pavement tracks, and dirt tracks. As you can see, it has the wire wheels on it, which are very telling of the 1920 and 30 big car era.
Well, there's a possibility then it could have ran in Kansas City at the board track we had down there.
Very well could have, because the board track was in operation back in 1923.
Once again, just a piece of art. All of these things to me, they just look so beautiful, and restorations are really good on all of them. But hard to believe that this is kind of where we started. What was this? Probably a 4-cylinder. Were they into offies yet?
They were not into the Offenhausers yet. It was a Frontenac engine. It was, I believe, a 6-cylinder Frontenac.
Wow. And what kind of horsepower were we talking about?
I have no idea what type of horsepower, what the top speed was, but I'm sure it's nothing compared to what we're going to see here in Knoxville this weekend.
Yeah. Okay, Bob. Well, thanks a lot, buddy. We appreciate you showing us this old one here. Like you say, you got to go back and find out where the roots were.
Yep, and it's a great place to do it. We have several 1930s, 1940s big cars in the museum where people can see the history of sprint car racing, where it all started.
Well, Bob, we have moved over here to what I guess we could call the Weld exhibition, because we've got a Kenny Weld car here and a Jerry Weld car. And, of course, being from Kansas City, well, we know those names very well around there. But looks like this was the 1965 champ here at the Nationals.
Yes, this was the car right behind us, the 94 car that Kenny Weld drove to the 1965 Knoxville Nationals Championship A-feature win. And then the car right next to it is a car his brother Jerry Weld drove. Both cars we grew up watching in the Kansas City area. And being from Kansas City, we have had Greg Weld's Super Modified here in the past, and some of the other Weld cars. Of course, Kenny Weld's Back to the Future car, which we have on loan right now to the Eastern Museum of Motor Racing in Pennsylvania. So we're very fortunate to have these cars with us this week.
You know, I look at these cars and brings back a lot of fond memories, much like the one we were just talking about there in the front window. But you know, kind of one of the stories that goes around Kansas City is that Kenny may have won the Nationals, but Jerry was probably considered one of the best out of the Weld family.
Well, I think Greg, won a lot of races. Jerry won a lot of races, and Kenny won a lot of races. Kenny was very popular and very, very very successful in Pennsylvania. He traveled to Pennsylvania at a young age to race back there at the tracks Williams Grove, Sings Grove. He just did a wonderful job representing the Kansas City area across the country, as did Greg and the whole Weld family. So it's nice to have these cars with us. I remember the 94 car. Went to St. Elizabeth's grade school there at 75th and Main Street, and this was in Joe Booth's garage, right down the street 2 blocks from the school, so my brother and I could walk by and watch him work on the car after school sometimes. And the cars really didn't look as wonderful as they do right now, all cleaned up and polished with all the chrome and everything, but they are the exact race cars, and we're very proud to have them in our museum.
As I was talking with a gentleman here earlier that was taking some still photos, I said, hey, there's no rock pits. Which usually most of the race cars all had rock pits on the front everywhere. But I think one of the things I remember, especially about Kenny, you're talking about racing in Pennsylvania, when they used to bring the big blocks here to Knoxville, and I think that one year he won with a big block, if I remember right.
Yeah, the thing that I remember about the 94 car is the different drivers that raced in it. The car was referred to by the people in Kansas City as the Tank because they said the car was indestructible. And I remember Greg telling me at one time that his father fired him and he fired Kenny out of the car and several other drivers. But we had a list at one time of 17 different drivers. John Backlund from the Kansas City area that drove the car, Tiger Bob Williams, Thad Dozier, just lots of drivers that drove the race car, and I asked Greg once, how come so many different drivers raced the car? And he said, well, Pappy thought that if you didn't win, the car was the best car, and if you didn't win, you weren't driving well enough, so he fired you after the race was over. So that's why it had so many different drivers.
That's kind of the story I got from John too. I've talked to him several times. Bud Honeycutt also talked about a lot about that, and like I say, if Pappy, if you didn't win, you were gone. That was it.
Yep. He just thought the car was the best, and at the time it was one of the premier cars in the Midwest, and so he had every right. It was his race car to put whoever he wanted to drive in the car in it.
Okay, Bob, we've had a good visit here with the Weld brothers. It's been interesting. Let's move on to another exhibit.
Sounds good. Thanks, Mike. Okay.
Well, Bob, it's only fitting that the Hall of Fame and Museum would have a tribute this year to Steve Kinser as he's completing a fantastic career. I don't know that anyone in sprint car racing will probably ever equal what Steve Kinser has done in a sprint car. And I believe you've got 7 of his former cars here, not all not all nationals championship cars, but still the 7 of the cars that he's driven over the years. And I know you can't really tell us about all of them, but I know I see the Trossel car there now. If I remember right, that's the one that they borrowed when their car broke and they won the Nationals with it.
Right, that was back in 1980, the Vice Grips car you see behind us that Steve won his first Knoxville Nationals in. That was a race that was fogged out in 1980 on Saturday night, and they had to run the race on a Sunday afternoon. And I believe Mike Brooks had a perfect score that race. And you're right, the car that Steve drove was Bob Trossel's car with Carl Kinser's engine in it because Steve had crashed Carl's car, and the engine had blown up in Bob Trossel. So Bob Trossel and Carl Kinser put a deal together, swapped engines late night, worked all night to get the car ready. And Steve came, and everybody thought Mike Brooks was going to win the race. Nobody from Iowa to this date has ever won the Knoxville Nationals. But Mike, everybody thought he was going to be the first one, and Mike did not have a lot of experience on day tracks, and the track slicked off and burned the tire off, which we have the tire in Mike Brooks' car further in the museum down the way. But Steve went on to win his first Nationals of 12 Nationals that Steve has won. First one was in 1980 in the Vice Grips car behind us.
Like I say, what a storied career the guy has had here, and so many, 576, I think, career World of Outlaw wins during that time. Like I say, how fitting it is that the museum is honoring Steve in this way. Tell you what, why don't we move up the line just a little bit, and we'll go to the other end and show one of the most recent cars that Steve has driven. Not a Nationals champ, but one of the cars that he has driven here in recent times.
That sounds good. We do have 7 of Steve's cars that he's won feature World of Outlaw races in, and we're just very proud to have the exhibit. Of course, we have the helmet that Steve won his 500th career World of Outlaw feature win in, and also a couple of his driver's uniforms and 2 unique videos that you can only see here at the National Sprint Car Hall of Fame and Museum.
Well, Bob, you probably have one of the most popular cars here that Steve drove. I don't know about the most winning car, but probably one of the most popular cars. And tell us just a little bit about it.
Well, the Superman car is one of the more popular cars because back in the day, very few people came up with a specific paint scheme to race at the Knoxville Nationals, and Steve, of course, had several. He had the Superman car, he had the Hulk Hogan car, and so Steve kind of started the special paint schemes for race teams coming to Knoxville to race in sprint car racing's biggest race. And believe it or not, this is the only car that Steve and Dana own. Dana Kinser actually owns it, and it was at Chuck Merrill's shop. Chuck agreed to let us borrow the car, and when we told Dana the lineup of cars, she goes, "Oh, so you've got my car." So this car is a car that's a favorite of both Steve and Dana's.
It like you say, fabulous paint job. Of course, I think they use so many wraps and things anymore. I don't know that you can say paint job, but it is pretty neat looking. And of course, there again, Quaker State, it looks like, is the main sponsor on this.
I believe so. It was raced back in 1999, and Steve brought it to Knoxville and raced it at several other racetracks, and then they kind of stored the paint scheme of the Superman car. But it was a very popular T-shirt design also for Steve that year.
Yeah. Like I say, really looks neat. You can understand why it was one of the most popular cars because it just has a unique look to it. We're going to shut down here for a minute and just move up one because I think this Quaker State car is probably one of the most recognized cars that Steve has driven because Quaker State sponsored him for so many years. Let's move over a little bit.
Sounds good.
Well, I'm not sure who designed the paint schemes or who did most of that, whether they had a commercial artist work on these, or Dana or Steve, or how they did that. But like I say, to me, this is probably the most recognizable Steve Kinser car that I can remember over time.
Well, I believe Quaker State, the marketing company at Quaker State, their department did a lot of the paint design work on the sprint car when Steve was sponsored by Quaker State back in those days, because I can remember Steve and Dana waiting for artwork before they could have the car painted and the decals applied and everything, and where the Quaker State name was going to appear on the car and which logo they were going to use. So I think Quaker State had their hand in the design of the paint. This car behind us, Quaker State car, was driven back in 2002 by Steve, and we also have, of course, Steve's Quaker State uniform and his Quaker State helmet that he won his 500th career World of Outlaw feature victory in.
There again, I can see the rock spots in there from where he was being pelted pretty heavily, it looks like, because there's some paint messing off of that. But boy, what a collection. Like I say, once again, anybody that's going to be in the area for the Nationals or any time, I mean, because how long is the museum open? Is it year-round, or how does that work?
Yep, we're open every day of the week, 7 days a week, year-round. So the only 4 days we're closed are Christmas, Easter, Thanksgiving, and New Year's. So we're here every Sunday and day-to-day from 8 in the morning till 6 at night. On race days, we're here until the races are over that night. So if you're at the races, feel free to come over. If there's a break in the action, and stop by, go through the museum and check everything out.
Just to give some people some directions, you're only about, what, 30 minutes off of I-35 from the west. How about I-80 up to the north? How far are you there from Des Moines?
We're 26 miles south of I-80 on Highway 14, so we're about a 30-minute drive off of Interstate 80 and about a 35 to 40-minute drive off of Interstate 35, so just about 30 minutes southeast of Des Moines.
All right, Bob. Love this stuff, and like I say, you can certainly understand the dedication to Steve Kinser with the years that he's put in sprint car racing, and fabulous display. Let's just kind of move to the other side of the museum, just give an idea to some of the people as to some of the other stuff that they might see. I know I can see from here a Kenny Jacobs car up there, I believe, so let's cruise up that way and have a look.
Thanks, Mike.
We've moved down to the other end of the museum down here, and we are beside the Kenny Jacobs 71M Echo Water car. I know Kenny had some great runs here, not only his, but of course there are several other cars on down the line here. But can you tell us just a little bit about Kenny's car?
Well, I think what most fans will recognize is that the Mater paint scheme is the same paint scheme that's on Joey Saldana's World of Outlaw car this year. The Mater name is no stranger to racing, and Kenny Mouse Jacobs is with us on the second floor every night for this year's Nationals, a Hall of Famer, of course. Just some interesting tidbits about this car raced in 27 different states, over 100 nights a year racing with the World of Outlaws and the All-Star Sprint cars, was also at the historical Big One race. So very prominent car back in its day that Kenny raced on and off throughout different sanctioning groups and throughout the seasons.
I think this just gives you a little bit more idea of the variety of sprint cars that are in here, and drivers and car owners and things that have been involved with those. And there's at least 6 or 8 more down the way, and plus several others in other locations. So once again, anybody that wants to come up, and if you're a sprint car fan, if you're an old timer, whatever, it's just a great place to come and be able to see these cars on display.
It's a great place to preserve sprint car racing's history and also help us promote the future of the sport.
Well, Bob, all I can say is I want to thank you again for taking the time out of your busy schedule. Like we talked earlier, busiest time of the year for you guys, and I just want to thank you again for hooking up with us on this deal.
Thank you very much, and thank you for all the video work you do with all the CARB members, the CARB Hall of Fame, and everything you do in Kansas City to preserve Kansas City's great racing history. I know Kansas City race fans and racers go back a long way, and they were a big part of what happened up here at Knoxville over the years and throughout all of sprint car racing history. So thank you for preserving the interviews and everything that you do with CARB and in the Kansas City area. It's been great to have you with us.